So, one of the great things about being a Unitarian Universalist minister is that when one of your congregants happens across an article with a title like, "Can Slime Molds Think?" they just know to send it to you. Now, maybe priests and like Buddhist monks get these too, I don't know, but I think this may just be my good fortune. So, big thanks to Jay Harvey for sending me "Can Slime Molds Think?" by Nancy Catherine Wilecki in the November-December issue of Harvard Magazine. So, slime molds. Slime molds are single-celled creatures, sort of a type of amoeba. They can grow quite large for having just the one cell, up to 30 centimeters in a lab. They are gross. Forgive my Homo sapiens prejudice, but if the conjunction of the words slime and mold don't adequately convey the relative grossness of this creature, I don't think I can do any better. They look kind of like bright yellow blobs, but not in a cheerful, friendly way, but more like the alien that ate Steve McQueen's town and teenage friends in the old movie The Blob. Sometimes individual slime molds can join together to form a larger slime organism that can grow to several meters across, again, just like in The Blob. And slime molds do not have brains, they do not have any sensory organs, but despite that, they are aware of their surroundings through a process scientists call mechanosensation, kind of a way of perceiving through interpreting vibrations. They use this sensory ability to navigate, to recognize food and to move about, and they're pretty clever about navigating their environments. They can traverse mazes, for example, in search of food. They are also, it turns out, expert mathematicians. When slime molds find a path to acquire several different little groups of food, they effortlessly solve a mathematical problem called the traveling salesman problem that it normally takes teams of mathematicians with supercomputers to solve. They do it by instinct. And in fact, there's an entire branch of computing now based on trying to be more like the slime mold. And in this new study, slime molds are seen making decisions. Scientists discovered that if they put a slime mold in the center of a petri dish, and they put like one disc, one object on one side of the petri dish, and 3 discs on the other side, the slime mold will go through like an initial period of exploring its environment, and then it will grow out towards the larger mass, the 3 discs, 70% of the time. And it doesn't like send out tendrils and kind of connect to the masses and then decide which way to go. It perceives the masses first, it decides which way to go, and then it commits to a course of action, and it heads off that way. Scientists have no idea as of yet how they do this. Michael Levin, one of the authors of the Harvard slime mold experiment, said the slime mold has a completely alien type of body with a very different way of living in the world, and yet we share something with it, which is the ability to map out the world we live in, to make decisions, and to try to do something that we like. So in last week's sermon, we talked about the surprising depth of intelligence in the animal kingdom. Today, we're going to look at intelligence elsewhere. Slime molds are not animals. They're protists, which is a different kingdom. They don't have brains or nervous systems, but they sense, they take in information, they make decisions, they act. Now, we humans as animals are naturally prejudiced to think of intelligence as something that happens in brains, right? We're prejudiced to think of intelligence as something that is accompanied by thought, reflection, maybe even language. We talk our way through problems as we solve them, which is certainly one way of doing it, right? The math teacher says, don't just give me the answer, show me your work, right? If you can't explain it, you don't understand it. But other organisms exhibit intelligence without showing their work. They exhibit intelligence in ways that we don't see and appreciate and name for what it is. They just do it. Now, sometimes we miss intelligence because we're focused on the wrong scale. For example, individual ants are not intelligent, so we say ants are not intelligent. But an ant colony does all kinds of interesting and sophisticated things. They build and maintain highways that run for miles. a feat of proportional engineering that rivals the Roman Empire. They build bridges, they farm, they trade surplus goods with other species. Cognitive scientist Douglas Hofstadter, in his classic work Gödel, Bach, argues that the intelligence of ants resides in the system, in the organization, not in the individual ants. You have to focus on the colony as the organism of interest. We humans don't naturally think of systems as being intelligent. And yet, what are our own brains except highly organized systems of individually quite dumb neural cells? Sometimes we miss intelligence because it's happening at the wrong speed. We're used to intelligence happening at animal speed, right? The speed of running and ducking and darting out to secure prey. But a new generation of plant biologists argue that plants are also very intelligent, just at a different time scale. In a 2013 article in the New Yorker called The Intelligent Plant, author Michael Pollan summarizes this view. He says, "It is only human arrogance and the fact that the lives of plants unfold in what amounts to a much slower dimension of time that keep us from appreciating their intelligence and consequent success." Biologist Stephen Mancuso points out that we use the metaphor of plants to indicate that which is senseless and non-responsive, right? We talk about someone being in a vegetative state. And yet, plants are exquisitely aware of and responsive to their surroundings. Plants have between 15 and 20 different senses, corresponding to all of the human senses and then many more besides. They respond to sight, sound, and touch. I'm sure we've all seen the footage of plants growing towards light, but it is much, much more than that. Plants can learn from and remember their experiences. A mimosa plant, the kind that curls its leaves at a touch, can learn that drops of water are harmless and retain that knowledge for months. Plants can apprehend. A researcher recently found that if she played the recorded sound of a caterpillar munching on a leaf in the presence of a certain species of plant, that plant would release a chemical defense to prime itself for the attack that was coming. In another experiment, a species of plant sent roots out toward the sound of water rushing through pipes, even though the pipes themselves were dry. Now, the roots of plants are exquisitely attuned to the chemical composition of the soil. And as they explore the underground environment, they will sense and travel around impenetrable objects before they reach them. Plant roots can recognize other roots they encounter nearby as belonging to themselves, as belonging to kin, as belonging to competitors, and then they adjust their behavior accordingly. In one experiment, 4 related plants were put in a pot, and rather than engage in their usual competitive root behavior, they recognized each other and they switched into a mode of cooperation. Darwin himself thought that the roots of plants might be analogous to animal brains. He described plants as upside-down animals with the brain below the surface and the body above. But meanwhile, in that above world, plants create a bewildering variety of chemicals, hundreds of chemicals that they use to respond to their environments. Plants use chemicals to attract friendly pollinators. They use chemicals to defend themselves. One species of plant, when attacked by caterpillars, will release a chemical that summons like a fleet of wasps to kill all of the caterpillars. They have bodyguard wasps that they can summon. Another species, when overgrazed by animals, will alter the chemical composition of its leaves to become disagreeable or even toxic to the overgrazing animal. If the plant gets really mad at it, it can even kill that animal. Plants use chemicals as a form of airborne communication. Researchers studying sage bushes noted that when sage bushes are attacked by insects, they release defensive chemicals that alert the neighboring sage bushes, who then arm themselves against the coming attack. Now, plants do these things without brains or nervous systems, but biologist Stephen Mancuso points out that brains would not be very useful for plants because plants are immobile. They cannot run away from predators, and all of their plant life is organized around this fact. They've adapted a very different body plan that is designed to be eaten. So plants can lose 90% of their body without killing it. You try that. Mancuso notes that plants accomplish this by diffusing all of their functions across the entire organism. And so it should not perhaps be surprising that the intelligence of plants is distributed as well, located in the entire organism, not in one localized hub of intense activity like a brain that is vulnerable to becoming a snack. Plants are in fact so intelligent and so responsive to their environment that Mancuso is one of a group of new plant biologists who in the early 2000s styled themselves plant neurobiologists. Plant neurobiologists. And these scientists argued that plants should be understood not as passive sort of biological machines that respond mechanically, if wondrously, to their environment, but they should be understood as intelligent organisms that respond intelligently to their environments. And plant neurobiologists argued that if we look, we might find structures in plants that are homologous to brains and nervous systems. They would look different, they would operate different, but they would serve that same function of creating a coordinated response. Now, this idea of plant intelligence is controversial, to put it mildly, amongst traditional plant biologists. A number of biologists even issued like a written declaration protesting against the use of the word neurobiology in response to plants. Michael Pollan quotes Lincoln Tays, emeritus professor of plant physiology at UC Santa Cruz, who said the plant neurobiologists were guilty of, quote, overinterpretation of data, teleology, anthropomorphizing, philosophizing, wild speculations. Another biologist put it more bluntly, said they are the nut house. And in response to the uproar, the Society of Plant Neurobiology has renamed itself as the far less controversial Society for Plant Signaling and Behavior. But the question is ultimately the same. At issue, says Michael Pollan, is whether behaviors observed in plants, which look very much like learning, memory, decision-making, and intelligence, deserve to be called those things, or whether those words should be reserved exclusively for creatures with brains. Now, to this list, we can add words like communication, cooperation, and kin care, because we now know from the work of Suzanne Simard and others that trees communicate and cooperate with each other in quite complex ways on a scale that we never imagined. Dr. Simard describes this process in a 2016 TED Talk called, straightforwardly enough, How Trees Talk to Each Other. And Darwin would not be at all surprised to learn that all this communication happens underground. Because the root systems of trees, it turns out, are connected underground by fiber networks of fungal threads called mycorrhiza, which arise from a symbiotic relationship between the trees and the fungus. The fungus get nutrients from the roots that they're connected to, and the trees in turn use the fungal network to send carbon, water, nutrients, and a variety of information-bearing chemicals to distant trees. And this allows trees to engage in reciprocal trade with other trees, even across species. One species of tree will build up excess carbon, and then it will send it to another tree that is in need across this route of fungal threads. And then when that other tree has the excess carbon, it sends it back, it reciprocates. The trees support each other. Simard discovered that this underground network allows trees to engage in supportive parenting. So-called mother trees can recognize their own offspring in the forest, and they do preferentially send those children trees food, nutrients, even chemical warnings when there's an attack coming. And when a mother tree is injured, it sends offspring information to help them survive a similar injury. Simard showed that trees that are wired into these mother trees have better survival rates than trees that are isolated, up to 4 times better. And these connections are omnipresent below the forest floor. A single tree will have its own network of connections, and then each of those trees has its own connections. And so ultimately, the whole forest is wired together as a densely connected network of branches and hubs. And all along this network, there's this constant interchange of resources and information. Some people have called it jokingly the wood wide web. And this connectedness allows the forest itself to be more resilient, more responsive, more adaptive, more intelligent. So again, we have to look past our human prejudice to just focus on intelligent organisms and miss the behavior of the larger systems, because yes, the individual trees are intelligent, the connected forest is wise. When Dr. Simard began working with Dr. Teresa Ryan, who's a PhD in resource management and environmental studies at the University of British Columbia, who is also an indigenous person, a member of the Gitlan tribe of the Tsimshian Nation, she learned that her magnificent discovery about the forests, remember, Dr. Simard discovered this in the 80s. That's how new this information is about how forests communicate. This magnificent discovery had been scooped by native people by thousands of years. Dr. Ryan directed Simard to the work of Bruce Miller of the Skokomish Nation, who went by the name Subiye. And Subiye had made it his life's work to preserve the stories, the oral traditions of his people. And he wrote these stories down. And Dr. Simard discovered that he had written about the fungal networks in the soil, and his people had known about these networks and how it kept the forest strong for millennia. And Western scientists have known since the 1980s. Can you stand one more scientific anecdote? Dr. Ryan herself studies a different network of cooperation that exists in nature. In this case, not between trees and other trees, but between trees and salmon. Salmon, swimming upstream to spawn, are incredibly dense with nutrients because it takes a lot of energy to make that journey. And this includes nitrogen. So when animals like bears and wolves catch and eat the salmon, they drag them off the banks of the river. Sometimes they drag them into the woods where the salmon decompose, and the decaying fish transports that nitrogen into the soil where it is absorbed by the trees. And in some studies, as much as 70% of the tree's nitrogen is coming from salmon. But lest you think trees are getting the better part of that bargain, every part of the salmon mating life is made possible by the trees, who shape and sustain the ecosystem of the river just exactly so, not only maintaining the banks themselves, creating shaded areas and cooling areas where the salmon can lay their eggs, creating rest spots where they can take breaks from the journey, providing food, insects that they pour into the waters for the fish. It's a remarkably mutually beneficial relationship. I want to thank Mike Hurdle for making this connection for me. I have the best worship team, it turns out. Dr. Ryan says her research in this salmon-tree relationship is motivated by her Aboriginal Tsimshian heritage and the guidance provided by her grandfather. Our worldview, she says, is that we are part of these ecosystems and we're all connected together. We can't be separated from each other, and collaboration is all a part of it. The world, she says, is an entwined place. And the entwinement of the world is, of course, a fundamental Unitarian Universalist principle. Right? Unitarian Universalism is in many respects a religion about relationship. And our seventh principle counsels respect for the interdependent web of existence of which we are a part. And the seventh principle is the one that for most UUs defines our relationship to the natural world, recognizing our interdependence and respecting it. But other religious traditions, including some Eastern traditions and some indigenous traditions, might push us further and might challenge us to consider the world in light of not just the seventh principle, but the first principle, the one that talks about the inherent worth and dignity of each person. And now we're asking about the inherent worth and dignity of each being. What if we encountered all beings, the question is asked, as having inherent worth and dignity? Environmental scientist Robin Wall Kimmerer, who's also a member of the Potawatomi Nation, writes that in the Western tradition there is a recognized hierarchy of beings, with, of course, the human being on top. The pinnacle of evolution, the darling of creation, and the plants at the bottom. But she says in native ways of knowing, human people are often referred to as the younger brothers of creation. We say that humans have the least experience with how to live and the most to learn. And she says we must look to other species for guidance as our teachers. She says their wisdom is apparent in the way that they live, and they teach us by example. They've been on Earth far longer than we have, and they've had more time to figure things out. And so in a 2015 article in Yes magazine, Kimmerer argues, we need a new pronoun. We need a new pronoun to fundamentally reorient ourselves in relationship to nature. The article is appropriately called, Nature Needs a New Pronoun. And Kimmerer says that in her native language of Anishinaabe, which was erased from her family in the boarding schools and which she is relearning as an adult, in Anishinaabe, it is impossible to speak of a living being as an it, as an it. She says in Anishinaabe and many other indigenous languages, we use the same words to address all living beings as we do our family, because they are our family. And Kimmerer asks us to consider replacing the pronoun it, when used in relationship to beings in the natural world, with the pronoun ki, which is a much shortened form of the Anishinaabe word, which I'm sure I will not pronounce correctly, bimadizeaki. Bimadizeaki. The plural of this word ki, she suggests, would be kin. Ki and kin. And so imagine if embedded in our language itself was the idea that nature was our kin. How different would our world be if embedded in our language was the idea that nature was our kin? Would our oceans be dying? Would our forests be disappearing? Would the mass extinction of non-human species be an unrecognized, unchallenged, uncontested reality of the modern world as it in fact is today? How differently would we orient ourselves to the world if we saw it as kin? Each person, Kimmerer says, human or no, is bound to every other in a reciprocal relationship. Just as all beings have a duty to me, I have a duty to them. If an animal gives its life to me, I am bound to support its life. If I receive a stream's gift of pure water, I am responsible for giving a gift in return. And she says an integral part of a human's education is to know these duties and how to perform them. And how different would this world be if we raised our children such that an integral part of their education was to know those duties and how to perform them. And if we made that an integral part of our own education. Just like we are counseled to honor our parents, to welcome the stranger, to treat guests with respect, to care for our neighbors, there is a rich tradition in the West of mutual obligation, of respect, of concern for people, however imperfectly we live it out. And what if we extended this ethic of care to all of our kin? Then we might say, in the words of the Kiowa poet Mama Day, you see, I am alive. I am alive. I stand in good relation to the earth. I stand in good relation to the gods. I stand in good relation to all that is beautiful. You see, I am alive. I am alive. May it someday be so, and amen.